With me today, we have one Auron MacIntyre. Auron works at Blaze. He is a king of Twitter and power metal aficionado and an all-round commentator for the distant right. How are you today?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. So, if you want to start, how did you get into this space? For those who don't know your origin story.
I have always been very interested in politics. I studied politics in college. I worked in kind of entry level GOP politics for a little bit, and then I became a political reporter. And that was just always an area of interest. But when I looked at kind of the elections of 2016 and then everything leading up to kind of the pandemic lockdowns, I said, okay, things are don't work the way that I thought they did, and I wanted to kind of understand why all the political theories and ideas that had been taught to me and I had explained to other people just didn't seem to work the way they were supposed to. And I started watching, YouTube videos, looking kind of outside the normal beaten path. Ran into some people like Dave the Distributist and Charlemagne, who were talking about this guy Mencius Moldbug, and started reading some of these different thinkers that they were talking about, and started my own YouTube channel, and here I am.
So basically, you found some of these people that you'd be speaking with at this very event, and now you're going to be speaking with them. Is that one of the reasons why you're interested in speaking in Nashville with us?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these guys were people who I just found very interesting and were exploring ideas that I had never really considered. And so one of the many reasons I started the YouTube channel was, to talk to these guys and kind of explore similar ideas that they were exploring. And over the years now, I've spoken to both of them online multiple times. I'm fairly familiar, friendly with both of them. But it's great to meet people in person. So many of the people speaking at the conference are people I know online, but I've been able to meet with people like Academic Agent in person now, and it really is a different experience to get to, to build those bonds in person. And so I'm really looking forward to that.
Absolutely. If For people who are looking if they're going to attend or not, I would highly recommend it. Just because meeting the people that you know from online, but also that you're particularly interested in these ideas with in person, the conversation is just so different to anything you would have online. Even if you're in group chats or voice chats, this sort of thing, in person itself is just a completely different experience. So yes, we're looking forward to see what's going to happen from this Nashville convention. Um, One of the things you mentioned earlier was your experience of doing working within the GOP. Now, the GOP has changed, I'm sure, quite a lot since those days in 2009, 2010. I assume you're talking about when you started working there. Do you have any hope for the future of the GOP, or are you really now fully aligned with some of the thinkers here who are just saying everything needs to be burnt to the ground?
Yeah, I wasn't doing anything super high level with the Republican Party or anything, but just from my experience in kind of local and regional politics, there's a lot of good people in these organizations. They're working hard, they believe in what they're doing. They're also, of course, just people who are there to make money. There's just a consultant class. There are people for who this is a job, and it doesn't do much. But the thing that is so defeating about the GOP is all of the intellectual and organizational baggage that comes with it. And I'm sure, I'm aware that in other countries, including the UK, conservative parties also have a lot of this problem. And it's just very clear once you start working with people that most people have just been handed some talking points about small government or freedom or something, and they haven't really thought a whole lot about kind of what it means to have a different vision, a truly competing worldview with the left. And so that makes it very difficult for them to do anything but kind of react to what the left is doing. It also means that most of the funding and most of the organization that is built in what are supposed to be these conservative institutions is fundamentally built inside a left-wing framework and can only acquire power and can only create kind of ideological structures and institutions and things in response to incentives from the left. So, for instance, in America, I think at some point, if a democratic vehicle is used to kind of change the American paradigm, the right wing version of that democratic vehicle might be called the Republican Party. But I don't think anything that is the Republican Party can really be part of that movement. It really has to be completely reshaped and reformed in almost every way if it's to be of any use. So there could be a way in which a Republican Party or a GOP in name is part of a solution if there is one through kind of the democratic process. But I don't think it will be one that bears any resemblance to what we have now as kind of mainstream conservatism and its priorities.
I think that's very astute. And one of the issues we have in the UK, I know I'm speaking from a Brit context here to an American, is that the Conservative Party in the UK basically has no intellectual backing at all. It's not that it's all within a leftist framework. It's that they have literally no framework. They're just basically in it for their own positions and for the power of the Conservative Party. And from what I can tell, it's kind of similar over there with lots of the establishment Republicans. They just say, we like the Republican Party, and that's about it. So in response to that, one of the things that we're trying to do with this conference, with SCYLDINGS, is to try and create a place, to build out this intellectual foundation, to build out networks of intelligent people who can start creating something that's genuinely an alternative to the leftist world that we currently live in.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely essential. You have, of course, right-wing think tanks and such, and there are people inside of those environments that are realizing kind of how dire their situation is. And I've seen some movement from people in those places to change things, but the journey is still way too far, and those institutions are so set into a particular system and so dependent on particular funding sources and such. It's really difficult for them to do anything interesting and new and to really escape the framework as it exists now. And so that's why in a very weird turn, so many of these people who were part of the establishment but see the problem are now breaking away, and they're looking to people who have been doing this on the internet or have been doing it in these small groups, have been doing it in these kind of, rogue organizations that have been putting this together outside of academia, outside of the think tank sphere, outside of the traditional media sphere. There's a reason that you're now seeing a lot of these mainstream political commentators and mainstream guys who worked in politics now interact regularly with internet anons and people who otherwise would have never gotten the time of day from any of these people. And the reason is I think they realize how kind of what the deficit is intellectually in the movement. And the people who really want to change things are reaching out to these new sources, this new blood, this new place where these ideas are being explored. They are, they are being talked about, and projects are being put together. But that puts us in a very interesting scenario, because if you want these things to flourish, you want them to flourish without being immediately just brought right back in to like the conservative echo chamber. Not that they can't interact with and benefit from conservative organizations or people who are leaving conservative organizations to found things that are new, but they have those connections. There can be, advantages there. But the fact that these things were created outside of that sphere is kind of what gives them their vitality and their utility to kind of a wider movement. And so I think it's really great that there's an opportunity for people to get together in, conferences like this one and meet with others who are, they're in so many different areas. It's really easy to get focused just on content creators, people making YouTube videos or writing articles or that kind of thing. But we need everything right now. The right is so far behind, it's almost comical. And so we need people who are working in finance. We need people who are working in logistics. We need people who are working in academia and content creation, but we need people who can create payment processors, and we need people who can just do all kinds of different things, build educational institutions. All this stuff needs to get done. And so, and while talking online is great, again, that face-to-face interaction allows people to coordinate in a way that just isn't available otherwise and build kind of that trust. And so the fact that you guys are allowing those spaces, I think, is extremely important.
To those who are not quite aware of what we do at Shieldings, there's lots going on behind the scenes, which is not just about organizing events. So if you, and so other people who come into the conference have other similar projects in the background where they're not just doing content creation, they're actually trying to build some of these things which Auron has talked about, whether it be payment type processors or educational activities. There are people doing lots of interesting things. So if you are a capable person, get in touch basically, or come to the event, even better. One of the things you mentioned is people are starting to reach out from the more established political environments because they are recognizing that we have something that they don't. How do you stop yourself basically becoming part of that blob?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a really difficult thing, and it's something that everyone has to balance, and everyone's gonna make mistakes to some extent when they're doing that. But I think the really important thing is to remember kind of where you came from and who uh who was there when you were starting this thing, when you were working with this thing, and to remember that these people are coming to you because they need something that only your group, your sphere is providing. And so it's really important when you're interacting with that to remember that the solutions that mainstream right-wing institutions have been pursuing have failed routinely for a reason. And there are people who are playing containment, and you have to recognize that. But you also have to recognize there are people in those institutions that are seeking something that works. And that's the reason they're trying to plug in. And so you have to have a level of discernment between those who would be looking to simply bring something like under their control so that they can make sure it doesn't do anything crazy or whatever, and those who are genuinely looking for like a new path forward. And I think it can be pretty easy to tell because they're the ones who were seeking out and looking to interact along the lines you were exploring in the first place, rather than trying to pull someone in and then say, well, you can't say that, and that's not what we do, and that's not where our support comes from, and that kind of thing. So it's certainly a difficult dance, to be sure, but I think it is one that is going to become increasingly easy once you start to realize that, again, there's a very particular type of kind of rogue elite inside the conservative movement that is very clearly connected, but is also very clearly looking outside of its spheres, and is not doing so simply because they're trying to pull people kind of under their structure, but because they're genuinely looking for a structure that works. And I think that's the really key. If you're gatekeeping to the level of we're committed to advancing this, and if these people can help with that, that's fine. But we're not joining something just for some kind of sinecure, so then we can just kind of move into the kind of the mainstream conservative machine. I think that's the line. And of course, again, it's difficult. Everyone's gonna, make a mistake at some point. I'm certainly sure I will or have or whatever. But it's simply an unavoidable part of having the value of your movement be recognized. There's at some point, if you're going to, people talk about a counter elite. They talk about the importance of developing institutions and talking about, gaining kind of power and these kind of things. But, one of the dangers of that is always interactions with the establishment. And you just can't avoid that if you're going to grow and if you're going to have an impact. The only thing you can do is try to gatekeep and keep your eye on the ball and manage that properly so that you understand what the purpose of that is.
Yes, absolutely. I'd say one of the other things you have to bear in mind is just how different some of our ideas are, not in a bad or malicious way, but they can appear very confusing to people who are more entrenched within normie politics, even those who are on the right of acceptable opinions. One example I give is I was asked to talk last year with a few members of Alternative for Deutschland, who are supposedly a very far-right party, and yet one of the people speaking from them was quoting Martin Luther King several times. So you can say in our sphere, no one would be quoting any civil rights activists, but yet if you're apparently a far-right German politician, it's something you have to do. So yes, when you're engaging with these people, be aware we are quite different, and you have to seduce rather than just berate.
Yeah, I think a trick, and when I say a trick, I really just mean a technique. I don't mean like anything where you're trying to deceive people, but like a technique that a lot of people don't understand is the importance of like properly coding your discussions when you're talking to people. So for instance, a lot of times, let's take something really basic, like the free market, right? The free market is something that American conservatives champion. Big fan of the libertarian bent of people in the United States, and so it's kind of a very sacred thing to the right. So if you just come in and you're talking to someone who's a conservative or someone on the right, and you say, well, we have to get rid of the free market, or the free market is the enemy or something. That's not only not true, like it's a bad way to understand the issue, but it's also like a hostile language that codes very poorly and makes them think, okay, this guy does not have my best interests in mind. He's not aligned with me value wise. However, if you explain to people, okay, we need a system in which families can flourish and people can afford to have children and people can afford to own homes, because people who afford to own homes and have children are far more likely to have independence from central government systems and dependence on all of their programs. And those are the things that truly capture people inside kind of this big government system. That might mean that the market needs to prioritize certain aspects of our civilization that allow for families and allow for independent property ownership. And that's a way that you can frame a reassessment of absolute free market principles that some people hold to the detriment of families without tripping alarms about, oh, I want to attack the free market. And so there's a way to go about these things, like you're talking about civil rights leaders. I did an episode on my show about how Martin Luther King was not a conservative. He's not a conservative icon. He didn't hold conservative beliefs. You might like one line of something he said in a speech somewhere, but this guy is not on your team. He's not on your side. He's explicitly against, or he's explicitly for affirmative action. He's explicitly for hiring based on race and equity. These were things that he actively he attacked. Capitalism and things like these are things that he said outright. And you can say those things to conservatives as long as you understand that you're still keeping their goals and their values as something that's forward facing. That the things that you've been told about this are not true. This person did not agree with you on those things, and you're not attacking directly who they are as people the way that the left does, but you're showing them that the things that many mainstream conservatives have said about the things they believe are not accurate and don't reflect the best interests of those people and what they actually value. And so I think that's a way in which you can reach across the aisle, you can reach across that chasm and say, hey, there's a way we can build a bridge for you to understand. You can keep many of the things you value and the things you prioritize, but you can keep them in a way that's actually better for them, that actually improves the chance that your children that you'll have children and grandchildren, and that those children will carry on your religion and your tradition and your culture. Like we can build a bridge between where you are now and the values you have to a different place where you will still further those things that you cherish and care about, but you will do it in a far more effective way that discards many of the ideological conceits that you had onboarded, thinking that those were essential to protecting what you held dear. And I think in that way, you can discard many of the ideologically harmful things that you or I might disagree with that come from, say, mainstream right-wing or conservative thought, but do it in a way that still shows people that you have their priorities and their good in mind, and you're not coding yourself as someone who's harsh and abrasive and just wants to tear down, but you're someone who's showing them a way to kind of build things together in a different way that is far more successful.
I think that's very well said. Would it be asking too much to say what sort of success you've had with this approach so far?
Sure. I mean, there's definitely steps, and I can't, I will say my success is not just my own. Many people have been pushing in this direction. And so I don't want to say, oh, I changed the minds of people all by myself on this, but there are many people. It's now very common in the conservative movement to start talking about not just, say, restrictions on illegal immigration, but the need for restrictions on legal immigration as well, or talking about the need for policies that ensure family formation instead of just talking about small government politics, or talking about institutions that actively forward the interests of the right wing or those who have a more traditional belief set, instead of just talking about institutions that play this game of institutional neutrality. That there has to be something that fills the cultural void. It's not just enough to say we're going back to the 90s, we're rolling back liberalism. Speaking of that, I think there are more and more people realizing that there are deep problems in not just progressivism or liberalism as it's described in American left-wing politics, but that there are problems with classical liberalism and some of its assumptions. And so I think there are a number of ideas that I've talked about that are now much wider and common understanding. Understanding that politics is about rewarding your friends and punishing your enemies. Just things that would have been completely untenable to any part of the mainstream conservative sphere a decade or two ago, or even 5 years ago in many of these cases, are now things that are regularly talked about. And again, it's, Tucker Carlson does, there are mainstream voices that are pushing many of these things as well. But this stuff has also been coming from people who are, more in the sphere that I discovered when I started doing this. And I think that they have done a lot of work in advancing this and making it something that mainstream American and British and other politicians have the option, or commentators have the ability to address.
What sort of timescale do you think we're really looking at here? Because I'll say there's, in some ways, we're very far away from being able to achieve the sort of political goals that we would like. But in other ways, because what you've said around people like, well, Tucker Carlson, but also lots of other people within the mainstream right looking towards us, there is, I think, a growing recognition that there's a gap that can be filled. What did Napoleon say famously? He saw the power of France lying on the ground and he just picked it up. There's almost that situation now, I think, with the right. Now you can see the power of what could be achieved, and they just need someone almost to go and do it. How far away are we from, finding someone to actually grasp the nettle and start doing some of these things properly?
I think we're probably far away from a complete sea change, but I think we're much closer to having a noticeable and prominent representation of kind of a new right or a different right kind of in these spheres. So I don't think you're going to see, King DeSantis Russian or King Trump, Russian and fix all these things in the next 4 to 8 years. I think that is further down the road. But I think the institutions that will train the next generation of leaders to move us the direction we need to go, I think those are being built now. And so I think we are in exciting times. We are in times of growth and building. I just wrote a piece about, conservatism is dead and we have to build something new. And this was my case to conservatives, is like, look, the institutions that you are invested in are dead. They don't further your values anymore. And you have to turn away from this idea of conservatism towards a time of building. And I think we are now in that time of building where we won't see that new leadership class moving to power in the next, election or two, but we will be creating the environment and the institutions and the groups that will foster that and make it a viable option in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's always good to, I think, end on a bit of optimism, and I think that's plenty optimistic for what we have for this interview. So, where can people find you if they don't know already?
Oh, sure. All my stuff is under Auron MacIntyre. You can subscribe to the podcast, YouTube channel, Rumble. All my columns are over at The Blaze, and follow me on Twitter and Gab and such. Auron MacIntyre.
Great. And everyone should go to our description, click on the links there, and you'll be able to buy tickets to the Nashville Convention, which is just outside Nashville at the end of June this year. So you should definitely attend if you want to hear people like Auron MacIntyre speak in person.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to meet everybody in person, get to hang out. It'll be great.
Great. All right. Speak to you all soon.